Emily had grown used to quiet dinners, but that night felt different. The sound of rain outside made the silence between her and Daniel even louder. She sat across from him at the long oak table, watching him push food around his plate without taking a bite. The clock ticked softly on the wall, marking each second that passed in uneasy stillness. Mark, her husband, was away again, another business trip, another lonely week. She told herself it was normal, that this was just life now. But lately, it felt like she was living with a ghost, and the only person who still made the house feel alive was Daniel. Daniel was 24, tall, polite, and quiet, always quiet. He worked at a small design firm downtown and came home late most days. Emily often stayed up waiting for him, pretending she was just reading, though she really just wanted someone to talk to. She cared for him maybe more than a stepmother should admit, but in a motherly way, or so she told herself. Since she had no children of her own, she wanted to be someone he could trust, someone he could lean on. But recently, Daniel seemed to be drifting further away. That night, as she placed the dinner plate in front of him, she tried to sound cheerful. "Long day at work?" she asked. Her tone was light, but her eyes studied him carefully. He nodded slightly. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." His voice was low, distant. Emily smiled softly. "You should eat something, at least." "I will," he said, though he didn't. For a moment, she thought about saying more, about asking if something was wrong, but she stopped herself. Daniel wasn't the type to open up easily, and she didn't want to push him away. She had learned that much since Mark and she married. Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something heavy was sitting behind his silence. When Mark and Emily got married 2 years ago, Daniel had tried to be polite. He smiled during the wedding, said all the right words, but Emily knew he wasn't sure what to think of her. She was younger than his mother, and maybe he saw her as someone trying to replace a person who couldn't be replaced. She had promised herself she would never do, that she just wanted peace in this house. But peace was hard to find when everyone seemed to be holding back something. The sound of thunder rolled outside and the lights flickered. Emily glanced toward the window. The storm was getting worse. She poured Daniel a glass of water and set it beside him. He murmured a quiet thanks, still not looking at her. The tension in the room felt like a wall between them. Emily wished Mark were home. He was good at keeping things light, filling silence with stories about his work. But lately, his absences were longer and his phone calls shorter. Emily didn't say anything, though she felt the loneliness more each time he left. She wondered if Daniel felt it too. After a few minutes, Daniel put down his fork and said, "I think I'll head upstairs. I've got some work to finish." His voice sounded flat, almost hollow. Emily nodded, forcing a small smile. "All right? Sleep early if you can." He gave a quiet yeah, then stood up, pushing the chair back gently before walking upstairs. His footsteps faded down the hall, leaving Emily alone at the table. She stared at the half-eaten meal, then at the rain sliding down the window pane. The storm outside seemed calmer than the one inside her chest. She didn't understand why she cared so much. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was the way Daniel's eyes sometimes looked like they carried more pain than he would ever say aloud. There was something in those eyes that made her heart ache with sympathy. He had grown up watching his parents' marriage fall apart, and now he was watching another one slowly lose its warmth. She couldn't blame him for being guarded. Emily sighed and began clearing the table. The plates clinked softly as she stacked them in the sink. Her reflection in the kitchen window looked tired. She wasn't old, but loneliness had a way of making anyone look older. She remembered how different things were when she first met Mark. He was charming, confident, always making her laugh. He had lost his first wife years ago, and Emily had believed she could bring light back into his life. For a while, she did. They traveled, they talked for hours, they shared dreams about the future. But after the wedding, something changed. Mark's work took priority, and the laughter slowly disappeared. Now it felt like she was married to his shadow, and the only real person she saw every day was Daniel. But even he was slipping away. As she turned off the lights and walked up the stairs, she noticed Daniel's door slightly open. She paused. The faint glow from his computer screen lit his face. He was staring blankly, lost in thought. For a second, she wanted to knock, to ask if he was okay, but she stopped herself. He needed space, she told herself. Still, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was wrong, something deeper than simple tiredness. The way he had said, "I'm fine," sounded like someone holding back tears they didn't want anyone to see. She walked into her own room and sat on the edge of the bed. The clock beside her read 10:47 p.m. She picked up her phone, thinking of calling Mark, but then she remembered his last message. In meetings all night. Talk tomorrow. It was always tomorrow. Emily placed the phone down and lay back, listening to the rain. The quiet of the house wrapped around her, heavy and cold. For the first time in months, she wondered if this home was falling apart in slow motion. She thought about Daniel again as silence, his eyes, the sadness he carried. There was something there, something he wasn't saying. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she wanted to know what it was. As sleep finally began to pull her under, one thought stayed with her. Something was coming. She didn't know what, but she could feel it in the quiet spaces between words, in the distance between their rooms, and in the way Daniel looked at her with eyes that seemed to hold both hurt and something else, something unspoken. Outside, the rain finally began to fade, leaving only the soft sound of water dripping from the roof. But inside that quiet house, the silence was just beginning to speak. The storm had grown worse the next night. Wind rattled the windows, rain hammered the roof, and then everything went dark. The power went out with a soft click, plunging the house into silence. Emily stood in the kitchen holding a candle, the flame flickering as she sighed. Of course, she whispered to herself. She searched for her phone to check the time, but saw nothing but the dim glow of lightning outside. Moments later, she heard footsteps. Daniel came downstairs, phone flashlight in hand. "Power's out?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, managing a small smile. "Looks like we'll be living by candlelight tonight." He shrugged lightly. "Could be worse. At least it's quiet." Emily lit a few more candles and placed them around the living room. The room filled with a soft orange glow that made the shadows dance along the walls. The storm outside felt distant now, softened by the warm light of the fire she had started in the fireplace. Daniel sat on the couch, arms resting on his knees, staring at the flames. Emily took the chair across from him, holding a mug of tea she had made before the power went out. For a while, neither spoke. The crackling fire seemed to say enough. Emily glanced at him, his face calm, but his eyes heavy. She could see the weight he carried, even in silence. "Rough week?" She asked gently. He gave a quiet laugh. "Something like that." Emily leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "You've been quiet lately. Is everything okay?" He hesitated, then said, "I'm fine. Just a lot on my mind." "You've been saying that a lot," she said softly. "And every time you do, it sounds less true." He looked at her, then away. The firelight danced in his eyes, revealing a storm that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "You wouldn't understand," he said, finally. "Try me," she whispered. Danielle took a deep breath. "I don't even know how to say it." He rubbed his hands together, his voice unsteady. "I've been trying to push it away for months, but it just keeps getting stronger." Emily felt her heart tighten. "Daniel, what's wrong?" He looked up, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I can't take it anymore." Our breath caught. "Take what?" He paused, eyes locked on the fire. "This feeling. Pretending everything's fine when it's not." He turned his gaze to her then, his expression raw, honest. "Every time I see you, it hurts." Emily froze. The sound of the fire seemed to fade into the background. "What are you saying?" she asked softly, though she already knew. "I don't know when it started," he said. "Maybe when you moved in. Maybe when you tried to make this place feel like home. Again? I don't know. But you did. You made it warm again, made it feel like someone cared." His voice trembled slightly. "And now I can't stop thinking about you." Emily sat still, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to say. This was something she never imagined hearing. She had always cared for Daniel, but not like this, not in the way he meant. Yet in that moment, seeing the pain in his eyes, she felt a rush of emotion, sympathy, confusion, and something else she didn't want to name. "Daniel." She began, trying to keep her voice steady. You're young. You've been through a lot. Maybe you're just lonely. Maybe it's not loneliness, he said firmly, his eyes meeting hers. I've tried to tell myself that, but it's not. It's you. His honesty hit her like a wave. She turned away, staring into the flames, her thoughts racing. She wanted to be careful, to protect him from his own emotions and herself from making things worse. Daniel. You can't say things like that, she said quietly. It's not right. His honesty hit her like a wave. She turned away, staring into the flames, her thoughts racing. She wanted to be careful, to protect him from his own emotions and herself from making things worse. Daniel, you can't say things like that, she said quietly. It's not right. I know, he said quickly. I know it's wrong. I've been trying to stop feeling this way, but I can't. I just had to tell you before it drove me insane. Emily took a deep breath. She could feel the heat of the fire against her skin, but her hands felt cold. You're hurting, she said softly. I can see that. But saying this, it doesn't solve anything. It only makes things harder. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with pain. I just needed to say it once. I don't expect anything from you. I just couldn't keep pretending anymore. Emily looked at him then, really looked. There was no anger in his face, no disrespect, just honesty and heartbreak. He wasn't trying to hurt her. He was trying to let go of something that had been eating at him in silence. I wish I could make it easier for you, she said after a long pause. He smiled faintly. You already did. You were kind when you didn't have to be. You listened when no one else did. That's more than most people ever do. Emily felt tears sting her eyes. She wanted to tell him that he deserved happiness. That one day he'd find someone who would love him the way he needed, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was nod. Outside, the thunder rolled again, echoing the heaviness in the room. The two of them sat quietly, neither knowing what to say next. After a few minutes, Emily stood. I think I'll check if the power's back soon. He nodded. Yeah, okay. But before she could take a step, he said softly, I'm sorry. She turned to him, her expression tender. Don't be. You were honest. That's never wrong. He looked down, his hands clasped together. Still feels wrong. Emily walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. You're a good person, Daniel. Just remember that. He looked up, his eyes filled with emotion, and for a moment neither moved. Then Emily stepped back, her voice quiet. We'll be okay. This will pass. He nodded, though his eyes said he didn't believe it. A flash of lightning lit the room, followed by a deep rumble of thunder. The candles flickered, and Emily saw the faint trace of tears in his eyes before he turned away. She stood there for a moment, unsure what hurt more, his confession or the fact that part of her understood it. She hadn't felt seen or cared for in a long time, not even by her husband. But she pushed that thought away. She had too. As the storm continued outside, Emily sat back down, staring into the fire. The warmth didn't comfort her anymore. It only reminded her of the space between right and wrong, love and loneliness. Neither of them spoke again that night. The fire burned low, the storm raged on, and in the quiet glow of that living room, two hearts carried truths that could never be spoken again. The storm finally ended by morning, but the quiet that followed felt heavier than the rain ever was. Emily stood in the kitchen staring at her coffee. The house smelled like smoke from the fire the night before. And every time she remembered Daniel's words, her heart beat a little faster. I can't take it anymore. Those words echoed in her head like a song she couldn't stop hearing. She didn't know what to think. Daniel's confession wasn't angry or disrespectful. It was raw, emotional, and full of pain. He hadn't crossed any line, but the truth he had shared changed everything. Emily had always seen herself as the calm, responsible one in the house. She was the bridge between two people who barely talked anymore. Now she felt like that bridge had cracked out. When Daniel came downstairs that morning, he looked tired. His hair was messy, his eyes dull, but he still greeted her quietly. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, trying to sound normal. "Did you sleep?" He gave a small shrug. Not really. Neither did I. She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. The air between them was thick with everything they didn't say. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stood by the counter. About last night, he began. Daniel, she interrupted gently. You don't need to explain. I understand. He looked at her, guilt written all over his face. I didn't want you to think I was trying to make things weird. They're already a little weird, she said softly, then sighed. But I know you didn't mean to hurt anyone. You were just honest. He nodded, staring into his mug. I shouldn't have said anything. No, she said quietly. You needed to. Maybe it's better that it's out now. Neither of them spoke for a while. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall. Emily felt torn between two emotions: relief that Daniel trusted her enough to be honest, and sadness because honesty like that could only make things harder. She had spent years trying to hold her marriage together. Mark was a good man, but his work had taken him away more and more. Their love had grown thin, polite, like something practiced out of habit. She missed being seen, being understood. And last night, for the first time in a long while, she felt seen. That thought scared her. Later that afternoon, Daniel was in the garage fixing something when Emily stepped outside. The air was cool after the rain. Kay, and she needed to say what had been sitting in her chest all day. Daniel, she called softly. He turned, wiping his hands on a towel. Hey, I've been thinking about what you said, she began. He stiffened, waiting for her to continue. I just want you to know that you didn't do anything wrong. Feelings don't always make sense. Sometimes they come when they shouldn't. He nodded slowly. Yeah, I guess. I don't want you to feel guilty, she continued. You've been through a lot, and I understand where this came from. But you have to promise me something. He frowned slightly. Don't let this ruin what's left of our peace here, she said softly. This house, it's already fragile. I don't want more silence, more distance. Daniel looked down. You still want me to stay? Of course, she said quickly. Your family. No matter what you said, that doesn't change who you are to me. For a second, he didn't reply. Then he gave a small nod, his voice low. Okay, but his eyes told a different story. The warmth between them had changed. It wasn't the same quiet kindness they used to share. It was something deeper, sadder, full of tension. That evening when Mark called, Emily tried to sound normal. He talked about meetings, flights, numbers. She responded with soft yeses and maybes, her mind half somewhere else. After she hung up, she sat on the couch, staring at the empty space beside her. She didn't know when she had started feeling lonely in her own marriage. But she did. Later that night, she found Daniel sitting on the porch, looking out at the dark yard. The moonlight hit his face, showing the sadness in his eyes. Can't sleep? She asked gently. He shook his head. Just thinking about last night again. He sighed. Yeah, I meant what I said. But I also know it can't change anything. Emily sat beside him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. Sometimes it's enough just to be honest. It helps you move on. He looked at her then. You think I can? She hesitated. I hope you can. I don't want things to be strange between us, he said. You're the only one who makes this house feel alive. She turned her gaze toward the yard. It's not strange, she whispered. Just complicated. For a few seconds, they sat in silence, listening to the night sounds, the soft hum of crickets, the rustle of leaves. It was peaceful, but beneath that peace was a quiet sadness neither of them could shake. You know, Daniel said after a moment, when you first moved in, I didn't like you. I thought you were trying to take my mom's place. Emily smiled faintly. That's fair. But then I saw how you tried, he continued. You cooked, you decorated, you talked to me like I mattered. It's been a long time since someone did that. His words hit her harder than she expected. You do matter, Daniel, she said softly. You always have. He smiled sadly. That's the problem. She looked away, not trusting herself to respond. Her heart ached for him, for his honesty, his pain. and the situation that neither of them had asked for. She wanted to fix it, but some things couldn't be fixed with gentle words. After a while, she stood up. "You should get some rest." "Yeah," he said, though he didn't move. "Good night, Emily." She paused at the doorway. "Good night, Daniel." When she went inside, she leaned against the closed door, her chest tight. She knew he was hurting. And deep down, she was hurting too, not because of what he said, but because he had reminded her of something she'd forgotten, how it felt to be cared for, to matter to someone. She went to bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. The wind outside had quieted, but inside her, a different kind of storm had begun, one made of guilt, tenderness, and unspoken feelings she wished she could ignore. Daniel's words kept echoing in her mind. "You're the only one who makes this house feel alive." She wanted to believe it was just loneliness speaking, but a part of her knew it wasn't. Single quotes. As the night went on, Emily realized something important. She couldn't change what Daniel felt, and she couldn't control what her heart had started to feel in return. But she could protect both of them from crossing a line they'd regret. The next morning, she decided something had to change. Maybe distance was the only way to calm the storm inside both of them. But how could she say that without breaking his heart or hers? The next morning came quietly. The sky was pale blue, washed clean after the storm. Emily stood by the window, watching sunlight touch the wet grass. The house was calm to calm. It was that kind of silence that comes when something important has ended, even if no one says it aloud. She could hear Daniel moving upstairs, drawers opening, bags shifting. She didn't want to believe it, but deep down, she knew what was coming. When Daniel walked into the kitchen, a small suitcase was in his hand. His eyes were red, though he tried to smile. "Morning," he said softly. Emily turned from the window. "You're leaving?" He nodded. "Yeah, I'm going to stay with my mom for a while. I think it's better for everyone." Her chest tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't have to go, but she knew he was right. Things between them were too heavy now, too full of unspoken emotion. "I understand," she said quietly. He looked at her, sadness flickering behind his calm expression. "I didn't want it to end like this," he said. "I never wanted to make things complicated." Emily shook her head. "You didn't. You were just honest. There's nothing wrong with that." He gave a faint, almost broken smile. "Honesty has a price, I guess." She walked closer, her voice soft. "Daniel, I need you to know something. You didn't ruin anything. You reminded me that people can still feel deeply even when life feels numb." He blinked, caught off guard by her words. "You don't hate me?" "Hate you," she repeated. "No, you're like family. You always will be." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "That means more than you know." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The morning light fell across the kitchen floor, touching their faces with warmth that didn't quite reach their hearts. Emily wanted to hug him, to comfort him like a mother would, but she didn't move. There were boundaries, now ones that had to be respected. Instead, she said quietly, "Will you call when you get there?" "Of course," he replied. And Emily, "Thank you for being kind to me when you didn't have to." She smiled faintly. "It was never a chore, Daniel. You made this house feel less empty." He looked down, gripping the handle of his suitcase. "That's funny. You did the same for me." Then he turned toward the door. Emily followed him, her heart heavy. When he stepped outside, the sunlight hit his face, and she noticed how grown he suddenly looked, stronger, calmer, though still hurting. "Take care of yourself," Say said. "I will," he answered. "You too." As he walked toward his car, she stood at the doorway, her hand resting on the frame. The sound of the car engine starting felt final. She wanted to wave, but her hand wouldn't move. When he drove away, the silence that followed felt sharp. Like the moment after a song ends, she closed the door slowly and leaned against it, closing her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from guilt, but from loss. It wasn't a love story in the usual sense. It was something quieter, something that lived between care and confusion, longing and restraint. It was human. That evening, Mark called. His voice crackled through the phone. "Sorry I missed your calls last night," he said. "How are things at home?" Emily looked around the quiet house, her voice calm. "Fine, just quiet. Daniel's doing okay?" "He's gone to stay with his mom for a while," she said softly. "Oh," Mark replied. "Well, that's probably good for him. He's been distant lately." Okay. Emily smiled sadly. "Yes, I think he needs time to clear his head." Mark didn't ask more, and Emily didn't offer. When the call ended, she sat on the couch, staring at the fireplace where the storm night confession had happened. The ashes were still there, faint and gray. A reminder of how something can burn bright and then fade quietly, leaving only warmth in memory. Days passed slowly after that. The house felt too big, the rooms too empty. Sometimes she thought she heard Daniel's footsteps or his quiet humming from his room upstairs. But it was only her imagination. She missed his presence to calm the small conversations, even the silence that used to fill the air. One afternoon, while cleaning the living room, Emily found Daniel's mug, the one he always used for coffee. She held it for a moment, tracing the rim with her thumb. It felt strange how something so simple could carry so much memory. Later, when Mark returned home, she greeted him with a smile, but inside she felt distant. He told her about his trip, his meetings, his plans for the next one. She nodded, listened, but her mind wandered. Something in her had changed, and she knew it. That night, after Mark went to bed, Emily stood by the window again. The moon was full, shining softly across the yard. She thought about Daniel, where he was, what he might be doing, whether he was healing. She hoped he was. She hoped that by leaving he had found peace. She whispered to the night, "Be okay, Daniel." In her heart, she knew that love comes in many forms. Some are simple and lasting. Others arrive quietly, fill your world for a brief moment, and then live, leaving you wiser, softer, and changed forever. What she shared with Daniel wasn't something either of them could define. It wasn't right or wrong, it was simply real. Two lonely souls had found comfort in understanding, and sometimes that's all people really need. Over the next few weeks, Emily started to rebuild her routine. She went for morning walks, redecorated the kitchen, and tried to find joy in small things again. But